Hi, welcome to the Aftermath Tales. Ready for a new story? Very well, let's begin.
Sometimes the cruelest act of love is also the kindest. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who love us most. Just imperfectly. Just humanly. My name is Coleen Marshall. This is the story of the worst day of my life and how it led to the best. The notification sound on my phone cut through the quiet hum of Apex National Bank like a blade. 3 rapid pings in succession. I glanced around to make sure my supervisor wasn't watching before sliding my phone from under the counter, grateful that Tuesday afternoons were typically slow. 3 text messages from an unknown number. My heart stopped. The first was a screenshot of what looked like a restaurant receipt for 2 people. Le Bernardin, the French place downtown that Louis and I had talked about trying for our anniversary, but never had because it was too expensive. Expensive wine, appetizers we couldn't pronounce, a romantic dinner I'd never been to. The second was a photo, blurry, taken from a distance, of my husband Louis walking hand in hand with a woman I'd never seen before. She was tall, blonde, elegant in a way that made my chest ache with sudden, sharp inadequacy. They were laughing at something, their faces turned toward each other with an intimacy that made my stomach lurch. Her hair caught the light like spun gold, and even in the grainy image, I could see she was beautiful in that effortless way I'd never been. The third message contained only words. I thought you should know, I'm sorry. I stared at the screen until the words blurred together, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Around me, the bank continued its normal rhythm. Mrs. Patterson depositing her Social Security check, college students opening their first accounts, young couples discussing mortgages, while my entire world tilted off its axis. Louis. My Louis, who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, who still remembered how I liked it after 8 years, 2 sugars, splash of vanilla creamer, served in the mug we'd bought on our honeymoon in Vermont. Who remembered to buy my favorite strawberry yogurt even when I forgot to put it on the grocery list. Who still kissed my forehead goodbye every morning, his lips warm against my skin as I pretended to be asleep, secretly savoring those quiet moments before the day began. Louis, who apparently had been living a double life. My phone buzzed again. More photos, each one worse than the last. Louis and the blonde woman at what looked like a hotel bar, her hand resting on his thigh as they shared a drink. The same hotel bar where we'd had our first date 8 years ago. He'd taken me there because he thought it was classy, and I'd been so nervous I'd spilled red wine on my white dress. Another photo. Them holding hands across a candlelit table, her head thrown back in laughter at something he was saying. I recognized that expression on his face, the slightly proud, slightly goofy look he got when he made someone laugh. The look I'd thought was reserved for me. And then the final photo, the one that shattered whatever was left of my composure, Louis and this woman kissing. Not a polite peck, but a passionate, hungry kiss that spoke of deep intimacy and familiarity. His hands were tangled in her blonde hair, her arms wrapped around his neck. They looked like lovers who couldn't get enough of each other. Coleen? Jennifer's voice seemed to come from underwater. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced myself to look up, to arrange my face into something resembling normal. Jennifer was standing at the next station, her kind eyes filled with concern. We'd worked together for 3 years, but I'd never confided in her about anything more personal than weekend plans or favorite TV shows. I'm fine, I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Just tired. But I wasn't fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. I excused myself to the bathroom, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. The fluorescent lights made my reflection look ghostly, pale skin that hadn't seen enough sun, dark circles under my eyes that hadn't been there this morning, lips pressed into a thin line of shock and growing rage. When had I started looking so ordinary, so forgettable? Who was she? How long had this been going on, and who had sent me these photos? Someone who knew us both? A friend? A stranger? Someone who'd seen them together and felt sorry for the wife who didn't know? The questions multiplied, each one more painful than the last. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shock myself back to some semblance of composure. I had 2 more hours left on my shift. 2 hours to pretend my marriage hadn't just imploded via text message. But first, I needed to know more. I pulled out my phone again and studied the woman in the photos with the desperate intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she looked confident, sophisticated. The kind of woman who probably knew which fork to use at fancy restaurants and could order wine without stumbling over the pronunciation. The kind of woman who wouldn't spill marinara sauce on her shirt at business dinners or laugh too loudly at inappropriate moments. When had I stopped being enough for Luis? When had our comfortable routines, grocery shopping on Saturdays, takeout and Netflix on Friday nights, quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles become boring instead of comforting? When had I become the kind of wife a husband wanted to escape from? The bathroom door rattled as someone tried the handle. "Just a minute," I called out, my voice stronger now, though my hands still shook as I typed a response to the unknown number. "Who are you?" I wrote. "How do you know my husband?" The reply came immediately. "I'm someone who's been where you are. He doesn't deserve your loyalty." I stared at the message, a cold certainty settling in my chest. This wasn't the first time. Luis wasn't just having an affair, he was a serial cheater. The woman in the photo wasn't his only betrayal. My phone buzzed again. "There are more photos if you need them. I'm sorry this happened to you." More photos, more evidence of my husband's deception, more proof that our life together had been built on lies. I didn't want to see them, but I knew I would. I needed the full truth, no matter how much it destroyed me. "Send them," I typed before I could lose my nerve. The photos arrived in a flood, each one a dagger to my heart, but I forced myself to look at every one. Louis and the blonde woman walking through the park where he and I used to jog together on Sunday mornings. Sitting in a restaurant booth, their conversation intense and intimate. Her head on his shoulder as they watched something on his phone. Probably a movie, probably something funny, probably the kind of easy intimacy I'd taken for granted in my own marriage. In one photo, they were standing outside what looked like a medical building, and she was hugging him close. He looked smaller somehow. Fragile. When was the last time I'd really looked at my husband, really seen him, instead of just going through the motions of our daily routine? I barely made it back to the toilet before I was sick, my body rejecting the betrayal along with my breakfast. When the heaving stopped, I sat on the cold tile floor and cried. Deep, ugly sobs that came from somewhere primal and raw. 8 years. 8 years of marriage, of building a life together, of believing in forever. All of it a lie. But even as I cried, a harder emotion was building beneath the heartbreak. Anger. Pure, clean fury at the man who had made a fool of me, who had let me continue living in ignorance while he built a secret life with someone else. I would confront him. Tonight. I would demand answers. Demand the truth. Demand some explanation for how the man who promised to love me forever could throw me away so casually. A sharp knock interrupted my breakdown. "Coleen, are you all right in there?" It was Mr. Peterson, my supervisor. I scrambled to my feet, quickly splashing more water on my face and trying to repair the damage. "I'm fine," I called out, though my voice was thick with tears. "Just feeling a bit under the weather." "Take the rest of the day if you need to," he said, genuine concern evident in his voice. "Jennifer can cover your station." I wanted to refuse, to pretend I was strong enough to finish my shift, but the thought of standing behind that counter for 2 more hours, smiling at customers and processing transactions while my marriage crumbled, was unbearable. "Thank you," I said, opening the door. Mr. Peterson took one look at my red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained cheeks, and his expression softened with the kind of paternal concern that made me want to cry all over again. "Go home, Coleen. Rest. Whatever's going on, it'll look better after you've had some time to process." If only it were that simple. I gathered my things in a haze, Jennifer squeezing my shoulder as I passed her station. "Call me if you need anything," she whispered. "Anything at all." The drive home was a blur of tears and rage and desperate hope that maybe, there was some explanation. Maybe the photos were fake. Maybe it was all some terrible misunderstanding. Maybe the man who still brought me flowers every month for no reason other than he'd passed them in the grocery store and thought they were pretty hadn't actually betrayed everything we'd built together. But deep in my heart, I knew the truth. The signs had been there for months, maybe longer. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The late nights at work that had become more frequent. The password on his phone that he'd never needed before. The way he'd grown distant, distracted, like his mind was always somewhere else. The decrease in our physical intimacy, which I'd attributed to stress and busy schedules but now realized had probably been guilt. Somewhere with her. As I pulled into our driveway, our home that we'd bought together, painted together, filled with memories and dreams and the accumulated debris of 8 years of shared life, I saw his car in the garage. Louis was home early too. My phone buzzed one final time. Another message from the unknown number. "I'm sorry, you deserve so much better." I sat in my car for a long moment staring at our house. The white colonial with blue shutters that we'd fallen in love with the moment we saw it. The front garden that I'd planted and tended. The porch swing where we'd spent countless evenings talking about our days, our dreams, our plans for the future. How many of those conversations had been lies? How many times had Louis sat beside me, planning our future while secretly building one with someone else? I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked inside to confront my cheating husband. The front door slammed behind me harder than I'd intended, the sound echoing through our small house like a gunshot. The familiar scent of home, the lavender diffuser in the hallway, the lingering smell of this morning's coffee, the vanilla candle I'd lit yesterday evening, now felt like a mockery. I found Louis exactly where I'd somehow known he would be, sitting in his favorite armchair in the living room, the brown leather recliner we'd saved up for 3 years to buy. A manila folder sat on the coffee table in front of him like an accusation. He looked up as I entered, and I was struck by how different he seemed. Gone was the warm, slightly sheepish smile he usually wore when he came home early from work, the apologetic grin he'd flash when he'd forgotten to call, accompanied by a kiss and some excuse about meetings running late. In its place was something I'd never seen before, cold indifference. Almost cruel in its calculated emptiness. "You're home early," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. I stood in the doorway, studying the man I'd shared a bed with for 8 years. Had he always been capable of this expression, this casual cruelty? Or was this someone new, someone the affair had created? The Louis I knew laughed at his own bad jokes, cried during sappy commercials, and once spent an entire weekend building a birdhouse because I'd mentioned that I missed the sound of birds in the morning. "So are you," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the storm raging inside me. "Slow day at the office?" Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance at having to maintain the charade a little longer. He gestured to the manila folder with the casual dismissiveness of someone discussing the weather. "We need to talk." My purse slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "Do we? Because I think I already know what you have to say." I pulled out my phone, hands trembling only slightly as I scrolled to the photos. The images that had destroyed my world, that had turned my husband into a stranger, that had revealed the lie our entire marriage had apparently been. "Want to explain these to me, Louis, or should I start guessing who she is?" For just a moment, one brief flickering moment, his mask slipped. I saw shock register in his eyes, then something that might have been panic, before the cold indifference returned like a shield sliding back into place. But in that moment of vulnerability, I caught a glimpse of something else. Pain, maybe, or fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" I stepped closer, holding up the phone so he could see the screen. The photo of him kissing her filled the display, undeniable and damning. "You don't know what I'm talking about?" He looked at the image for a long moment, and I watched his face harden. Not with guilt or shame, but with something that looked almost like resolve. As if he was making a decision, crossing a line he could never uncross. "Where did you get these?" he asked finally. "Does it matter? They're real, aren't they?" Louis leaned back in his chair. Our chair, the one we'd picked out together. The one where he'd held me through stomach flu and heartbreak and the night my father had his heart attack. For the first time since I'd walked in, he looked directly at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my blood run cold. There was no shame, no remorse, No trace of the man who used to look at me like I was his whole world. There was only cold calculation, the expression of someone who had already made up his mind. Yes, he said simply, they're real. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known it was coming. My knees actually buckled and I had to grab the doorframe for support. How long? Does it matter? The casual dismissiveness of it, the way he was treating the destruction of our marriage like a minor inconvenience, made me want to scream. It matters to me. He shrugged. Actually shrugged, as if my pain was nothing more than a mild annoyance. A few months, maybe longer. I don't really keep track. The words hit me like bullets. Maybe longer? My voice was rising now, control slipping through my fingers like sand. You don't keep track of how long you've been destroying our marriage? Our marriage was already destroyed, Coleen. This just made it official. I stared at him. This stranger wearing my husband's face, speaking in my husband's voice, but saying words I couldn't comprehend. What is that supposed to mean? It means we've been going through the motions for years. You know it as well as I do. He gestured between us with a dismissive wave, the same hand that used to trace patterns on my skin when we made love, that used to hold mine during movies, that wore the wedding ring I'd placed there 8 years ago. We're roommates, not lovers. We're comfortable, not happy. Whatever this was, it was over long before I met her. Her? She has a name, doesn't she? The words came out strangled, desperate. Don't I at least deserve to know who you threw our marriage away for? His face closed off completely. No, you don't. The flat refusal was somehow worse than anything else I felt something break inside me, something that might have been hope. Hope that this was temporary insanity, that he'd come to his senses, that we could somehow find our way back to each other. I don't understand, I whispered, and I hated how broken I sounded. I don't understand any of this. Yesterday morning you kissed me goodbye. You told me you loved me. Was that a lie too? Probably. The word hit me like a slap. I stumbled backward, my hand finding the wall for support. Probably. Look, Coleen, this doesn't have to be messy. That's why I'm here. He nodded toward the manila folder, as if it contained nothing more important than tax documents or insurance papers. Divorce papers. I had my lawyer draw them up. Sign them, and we can end this cleanly. Divorce papers? The words came out strangled. You already. How long have you been planning this? Long enough. He leaned forward, all business now, the same focused expression he wore when he was working on a difficult project at the office. I'm being generous. The house, most of our savings, even my life insurance, it all goes to you. More than you'd get if you fought me in court, and you don't have the money for a lawyer anyway. The clinical way he discussed dismantling our life made me feel nauseous, as if 8 years of marriage, of love, of building something together could be reduced to a simple transaction. Assets and liabilities, property division and financial settlements. I need time to think, to process this, to figure out what went wrong with us. There's nothing to figure out. We're done. We've been done for a long time. His voice was getting sharper, impatient, like I was a client who couldn't grasp a simple concept. Just sign the papers, Coleen. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder than it needs to be? The words exploded out of me. 8 years of love and trust and shared dreams boiling over into rage. You're destroying our marriage. You're abandoning everything we built together. How could this possibly be harder? Because you're being dramatic about it, he snapped. And there was the Louis Wyneux, impatient with what he perceived as unnecessary emotion, frustrated when I didn't process things the way he did. This is just paperwork. It doesn't change anything real. That's when I lost it completely. 8 years of love, of trust, of believing in forever, reduced to paperwork. I lunged forward and slapped him, hard enough that the sound echoed in the quiet room, hard enough that my palm stung and his head snapped to the side. Fuck you, Louis, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Fuck you and your paperwork and your generous offer and your nameless whore. He touched his cheek where my palm had left a red mark, but his expression didn't change. If anything, he looked almost relieved, as if my outburst had confirmed something he'd already decided about me. Feel better now? He asked. No, I said, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. I don't think I'll ever feel better again. But I walked to the coffee table, picked up the pen that was waiting there. Of course he'd thought of everything, and signed my name on every line marked with a yellow sticky note. My signature was shaky, barely legible, but it was done. 8 years erased with a few strokes of a pen. "There," I said, throwing the pen at him. It bounced off his chest and clattered to the floor. "Your paperwork is complete." Louis gathered the papers with efficient movements, sliding them back into the manila folder with the same care he'd once used to handle our wedding photos. "Thank you." He stood up, straightening his tie with the same careful precision he'd used every morning of our marriage. Only now I wondered if he'd been getting ready for her those mornings, not for work. If the kiss goodbye he gave me each day had been nothing more than muscle memory, an automatic gesture while his heart was already somewhere else. "My things are already packed," he said, nodding toward the hallway where I now noticed a suitcase waiting by the front door. How long had it been there? How long had he been planning this exit while I lived in blissful ignorance? "I'll be out of your hair in 5 minutes." "Where will you go?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, before I could remember that I no longer had the right to care about his plans. He paused, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the old Louis. The one who used to hold me when I cried, who brought me soup when I was sick, who once drove 4 hours to be with me when my grandmother died. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "That's not your concern anymore." He walked toward the door, picking up his suitcase. I followed, not knowing why, like a mourner trailing behind a funeral procession. At the threshold, the same doorway where he'd carried me 8 years ago, laughing and giddy and stupid with love, he turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, Coleen, this isn't about you. You're a good person. You deserve better than this." "If I'm such a good person," I said, my voice breaking, "why are you doing this to me?" But he was already walking away, his footsteps steady on our front walkway. The walkway we'd shoveled together every winter, where we'd sat with our morning coffee on warm spring days, where he'd taught me to identify the different birds that visited our feeders. I watched through the window as he put his suitcase in the trunk of his car, as he got behind the wheel, as he drove away from our house. My house now, apparently, without looking back. Not once. When his taillights disappeared around the corner, I sank to the floor right there in the entryway and sobbed. Not the controlled tears I'd held back during our confrontation, but raw, ugly crying that came from somewhere deep and primal. I cried for the marriage that was over, for the future that had just evaporated, for the man I'd loved who had turned into someone I didn't recognize. But mostly I cried because despite everything, the photos, the cruelty, the casual destruction of everything we'd built, part of me still loved him, and I didn't know how to stop. I called in sick to work the next morning, my voice so hoarse from crying that I didn't have to fake it. Mr. Peterson's concerned tone made me cry all over again, the kindness of a relative stranger highlighting just how alone I now was. "Take all the time you need, Coleen," he said. "Your health comes first." If only he knew that what was broken couldn't be healed with rest and chicken soup. The house felt enormous and empty without Louis's presence, every room echoing with memories I now questioned. Had he been thinking of her when he laughed at my jokes over dinner? When he helped me paint the bedroom walls that soft blue I'd fallen in love with at the hardware store? When he made love to me just 3 weeks ago, whispering that he'd never loved anyone the way he loved me? All lies, all of it. I wandered from room to room, picking up objects that had once held meaning and finding them transformed into painful reminders. His side of the closet was mostly empty now, just a few old t-shirts and the suit he'd worn to his cousin's wedding 2 years ago, the one that had gotten a stain on the jacket that we'd never managed to get out completely. Everything else was gone, taken to whatever new life he was building with her. The practical realities of my situation began to sink in as the day wore on. The house might be mine now if Louis was telling the truth about the divorce settlement, but I had no idea how I'd afford to keep it on my part-time bank teller salary. The house is under his name. What if he lied and kicked me out tomorrow? Louis had always handled our finances, insisting he was better with money, that his business degree made him more qualified to manage our accounts. Now I wondered what else he'd been hiding from me. What other secrets had he kept while I lived in trusting ignorance? I was 3,000 miles from my family in California with maybe $2,000 in my personal savings account, money I'd squirreled away for Christmas presents and emergency car repairs, never imagining I'd need it to survive my husband's abandonment. The second day was worse. The numbness wore off, replaced by a restless anxiety that had me pacing the house, jumping at every sound. I kept expecting Louis to walk through the door, to tell me this was all some horrible mistake or elaborate test of my love. But his key didn't turn in the lock. His car didn't pull into the driveway. I tried to eat and couldn't keep anything down. Tried to sleep and lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship, looking for clues I'd missed. When had he stopped loving me? When had I become someone he could dismiss so easily? When had comfortable become boring? Familiar become undesirable? The questions consumed me, but they were nothing compared to the darker thoughts that crept in during the quiet moments. What was wrong with me that my husband preferred a stranger? Was I not pretty enough, not interesting enough, not good enough in bed? Had I let myself go without realizing it? Had I become the kind of wife men wanted to escape from? I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, my bedroom mirror now, and cataloged my flaws with brutal honesty. Plain brown hair that never held a curl the way I wanted it to. Brown eyes that were nice enough but nothing special. Nothing that would make a man stop in his tracks. A body that was soft in all the places the woman in the photos was firm. My stomach not quite flat, despite my occasional half-hearted attempts at exercise. My thighs touching where hers probably didn't. Stretch marks on my hips from the weight I'd gained and lost over the years. Maybe Louis was right. Maybe I had let myself go, become too comfortable, stop trying to be the woman he'd fallen in love with. Maybe this was what I deserved for taking our marriage for granted, for assuming love was enough without effort, for thinking that being a good wife meant being a comfortable one rather than an exciting one. The thought was so toxic, so destructive, that it scared me. But once it took root, I couldn't shake it. I found myself mentally comparing myself to the woman in the photos, coming up short in every comparison. She was probably everything I wasn't. Exciting where I was predictable, sophisticated where I was simple, beautiful where I was merely adequate. By the third day, I was questioning everything about myself, wondering if there was something fundamentally unlovable about me that had driven my husband into another woman's arms. The seeds of self-doubt had been planted, and they were taking root with frightening speed. 3 weeks after Louis left, a courier delivered an envelope from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside were deed transfer documents and information about a financial settlement. The house had been transferred to my name, and a check for $350,000 had been deposited into my account. $350,000. I stared at the number, certain I was misreading it. Why would Louis give me this much money? This wasn't the behavior of a man who had simply fallen out of love. This was guilt money, or pity money, or both. I called the law firm listed on the letterhead. The attorney was professional but limited in what he could share. The funds come from your husband's personal accounts and investments. He was quite insistent that the transfer be completed immediately. Where did he get this money? I asked. This appears to be a straightforward divorce settlement, albeit an unusually generous one. Unusually generous didn't begin to cover it. The Louis I knew was careful with money, practical. This level of financial compensation suggested something deeper, something he couldn't bring himself to tell me. But at least I had security now. I wouldn't lose the house or end up homeless. It was a small victory in a sea of defeat, but I'd take what I could get. 4 months later, I was working my shift at the bank when Jennifer touched my shoulder. "Coleen, there's someone here asking for you. She says she has important news." I looked toward the front of the bank and my blood went cold. The woman from the photos stood there, tall, blonde, beautiful. She looked different than in the pictures, smaller somehow, more fragile. But there was no mistaking those eyes. "You're Coleen," she said when I approached. It wasn't a question. "And you're the woman sleeping with my husband." Something flickered across her face, guilt maybe, or pain. "Can we talk? Somewhere private?" It's about Louis. The familiarity in her voice when she said his name made my stomach twist. I get off at 3. There's a coffee shop called Marina's 2 blocks north. I'll meet you there. She nodded with relief. Thank you, I know this must be. Don't tell me how this must be for me. You have no idea. I turned away, walking back to my station on unsteady legs. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. She was waiting at Marina's when I arrived, 2 cups of coffee cooling on the table. I ordered you a latte. I hope that's okay. I'm here. Now talk. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I'm Sonia Anderson, she said softly. Louis' best friend from high school. And I need you to know something. Louis and I, we never had a romantic relationship. I stared at her. What? What did you say? We were never lovers, Coleen. We never slept together. We hadn't seen each other in 20 years until he called me, desperate. And those photos you saw, they were staged, she nervously said. Staged? I couldn't believe what I'm hearing. Louis asked me to pretend to be his mistress, to help him make you believe he was having an affair so you would divorce him. The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. Why would he do that? Because he's dying, Coleen, she said quietly, and he didn't want you to watch him do it. The words hit like a physical blow. Dying? What? Louis has cancer, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He was diagnosed 4 months ago. The doctors told him he had 6 months left. I set my coffee down with shaking hands. No, you're lying. I wish I was. She pulled out her phone, showing me text messages between her and Louis that painted a horrifying picture. Louis, Sonia, oncologist confirmed it spread to my liver, maybe 6 months left. Louis, this is insane. Tell Coleen the truth. No, she'll waste her life watching me die. Promise me you'll never tell her. Louis, I hate this plan. Promise me, Sonia. It's the only way. I scrolled through more messages, photos from what I now realized were not romantic dates, but doctor appointments. Sonia driving Louis to chemotherapy, sitting with him in waiting rooms. The betrayal I'd carried for 4 months transformed into something else entirely. Grief, rage, and love so fierce it took my breath away. That idiot, that noble, stupid idiot. Sonia nodded, tears in her eyes. He cried every day after you signed those papers. He kept saying it was for the best, but he was destroying himself with guilt. The money, I said suddenly. The $350,000. Life insurance payout. He cashed in his policy early, took a huge penalty to make sure you'd be financially secure. And the house. He took care of the transfer long before the cancer diagnosis. He knew something was wrong. He never told you that he was feeling sick, and he didn't tell you he was seeing a doctor. I pulled my hand away, anger breaking through shock. He put me through hell. I've spent 4 months thinking it's all my fault, questioning everything about myself. I told him this was cruel, but he was convinced he was doing the right thing. She said. Where is he? I demanded. Where is Louis now? Sonia hesitated. He's been staying in a studio apartment near the hospital. But Coleen, you need to know, he's gotten much worse. The doctor said the chemo isn't working anymore. I have to see him right now, I demanded. You should know he made me promise not to tell you. He's going to be furious. I don't care. And I didn't. I was beyond caring about promises or pride. Please, Sonia, please take me to him. The apartment building was modest, institutional. Sonia led me to Unit 12B, knocking gently. Louis, it's me. Doors open, came a voice from inside, my husband's voice, but thinner, worn down. The studio was small and sparse, medical equipment lining one wall. Louis sat in a chair by the window, his back to us. Even from behind, I could see how much weight he'd lost. How did the appointment go? He asked without turning around. Did Dr. Martinez have anything? He stopped mid-sentence as he swiveled to face us, his eyes widening in shock when he saw me. No, he whispered. Sonia, no, you promised. And there he was. What 4 months and advanced cancer had done to my husband was devastating. His face was gaunt, yellowed with jaundice, his clothes hung on his diminished frame, but his eyes, his beautiful brown eyes, were exactly the same. You shouldn't be here, Coleen, he said. We're divorced. You've moved on. Moved on? The words came out as a harsh laugh. You think I could forget 8 years because you handed me papers to sign? You should have. That was the whole point. He was backing away now. You're free. You can build a new life without my husband, without the man I love. I stepped forward. You stupid, noble, impossible man. Did you really think I'd be better off believing you'd stopped loving me? I never stopped loving you. The admission was raw, desperate. God, Coleen, I never stopped. Not for a second. Then why? Why put us both through this hell? Because you would have stayed. His voice broke. You would have watched me waste away, watched me become less and less of the man you married. You would have held my hand while I died, and then spent the rest of your life mourning instead of living. That was my choice to make. And this was mine. He was crying now. I couldn't do it, Coleen. I couldn't be selfish enough to drag you down with me. You're only 32. You deserve someone who can grow old with you, not someone who's going to leave you a widow. You arrogant bastard, I said, fury breaking through grief. You decided I was too weak to handle your illness. You took away my choice, my right to love you through the worst of it. I was trying to protect you. You were protecting yourself. The truth came out sharp and cutting. You were afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of not being the strong one. So you pushed me away rather than trust me to love you when you couldn't be perfect anymore. Louis stared at me, his face cycling through shock and guilt. You're right, he whispered. I was terrified of you seeing me like this. Weak, sick, dying. I wanted you to remember me the way I was. What I loved most about you was never about how you looked, Louis. I fell in love with your heart, your humor, your devotion. Did you really think cancer could change that? He sank onto the hospital bed, his legs giving out. I don't know what I thought. When Dr. Martinez told me I had months, all I could think about was how much this would hurt you. Sonia stepped forward quietly. I'm sorry, Louis. I know I promised, but I couldn't watch you suffer alone anymore. And Coleen deserved the truth. Louis looked between us, his anger melting into relief. I sat beside him, our first physical contact in 4 months. He felt fragile, bird-like, but he was still Louis, still mine. How much time? I asked. How much time do we have left? He looked at Sonia, who nodded encouragingly. Dr. Martinez thinks maybe 6 weeks. 8 if I'm lucky. 6 weeks. Then we're not wasting another day on this noble sacrifice bullshit. You're coming home with me. We're going to spend whatever time you have left together the way it should have been. Coleen, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling. For the first time since I'd walked in, Louis smiled. Really smiled. Yes, ma'am, I'd like that very much. Getting Louis home was harder than expected. He moved slowly, pausing frequently to catch his breath. 4 months ago, he could have jogged up our front steps. Now they were Mount Everest. But we made it. Into the living room where he'd asked for a divorce, where everything felt different now. Heavier with truth, lighter without lies. We sat together on the couch, both of us crying quietly for the time we'd lost and the time we had left. I'm scared, Coleen, he whispered. So scared of what's coming. Me too, I whispered back, but we'll be scared together. Louis, yeah? No more secrets. From now until the end, we tell each other the truth about everything. He looked at me seriously. Even when the truth is ugly? Even when it hurts? Especially then, I cupped his face in my hands. We've already lost 4 months to lies. I won't lose another day. Okay, he said simply. No more lies. The next morning, I called in to arrange extended family leave. Sonia helped move Louis' medical equipment. We learned the rhythm of medications, good days and bad days, the practical realities of loving someone who was dying. Sonia helped with everything. She introduced me to Mary, the live-in nurse who'd been caring for Louis. Mary was a godsend, gentle but efficient, managing his medications and knowing exactly when he needed rest versus when he needed distraction. He talks about you constantly, Mary told me quietly that first day. Even when he was trying to convince himself this separation was right, he never stopped loving you. Sonia visited regularly, and despite everything, I found myself grateful for her friendship. She understood the weight of these months in ways no one else could. I'm sorry I broke my promise, she told Louis one afternoon. I'm not, he replied, watching me arrange flowers by his bedside. You gave me back the most important thing in my life. Louis's decline was faster than expected. By the 4th week, he was mostly bedbound. But we had those weeks. Really had them. We talked about everything we'd never said, held each other through the worst of it, loved each other with the fierce urgency of borrowed time. On a quiet Wednesday morning, as autumn light filtered through our bedroom windows, Louis squeezed my hand one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, "for forgiving me, for coming home." "Thank you," I whispered back, "for loving me enough to let me stay." "I love you, my wife," he whispered. He closed his eyes then and didn't open them again. 3 years later, I still live in our house, though I've made it mine now. Louis's chair by the window where he spent his final days, a garden with flowers he loved, photos from our last 6 weeks together, alongside happier memories. Some days I'm still angry at the time his fear cost us, but mostly I'm grateful. Grateful that Sonia found the courage to break her promise. Grateful for the weeks we had to say goodbye properly. Grateful that love, even misguided love, brought us back together in the end. And grateful that the last thing Louis saw was my face, full of forgiveness and fierce, imperfect love, the truest thing either of us ever knew.
If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Don't forget to follow for more content just like this. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.